Hi, welcome to the Business Class ESL Breakroom. We're a company of passionate language trainers and coaches. We're here to share ideas to improve our skills and strengthen the training community. Come in for some inspiration, leave with tips to apply to your sessions today. Hi, and welcome to the Business Class ESL Breakroom, the podcast to keep you and your ESL training moving forward. My name is Sue, and I'm very excited for today's show as it is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, self-care. We are extremely lucky to have a guest who is uniquely poised to speak to us ESL trainers in particular. Rachael Roberts is a career-long ESL professional who has done it all in this field, from training in Egypt, Portugal, Poland, and Brazil, to writing materials for many well-known publishing houses. She's had a rich and varied career steeped in the ESL world. So at this point, her career is dovetailed into business and life coaching for ESL professionals, among others. So welcome, Rachael. We're really happy to have you here. Thank you for taking the time.
Really pleased to be here. Thank you, Suzanne.
Yeah, it's great. So to start, I would love if you might just share a bit about your journey and what brought you into coaching and wellness after such a rich career in ESL.
So, this is something that, I talk about quite a lot because I think it's important, that people understand that I've been there, if you like. So what kind of got me into all of this in the first place really was two experiences I had quite early in my career of burning out. So the first one was when I was teaching abroad and working ridiculous hours and traveling all the time as well. I was probably doing about 70 hours a week, I would say. And it sort of just got to the point where I came home back to the UK for Christmas, and having that break made me realise just like how bad things were. And so basically, I didn't go back after that. And then I got a job at an FE college, that's Further Education College in the UK. And everything went swimmingly with that for a year or two. I got my arm twisted into becoming a manager, which wasn't quite so swimming, but it was still, okay, because I had arranged that I wouldn't do, all of the tasks that perhaps should be included. So I wasn't doing the funding because I knew nothing about that kind of thing, So there was somebody who was dealing with those sorts of things, and I was focusing on the people, which is what I've always liked. And then the person who was dealing with that side of things went on maternity leave, and we had an Ofsted inspection, which is like the government inspection. And suddenly I had to deal with all of it and be inspected on it. And guess what happened? It was just too much. And I ended up having to take time off again. And at that point, I'm obviously a slow learner, realized that something had to change, not just in the jobs that I had, because yes, they were complicit, and they were overloading me, but it was also about me. And it was about what I was agreeing to, what I was taking on, the sort of urge that I had to kind of be perfect and to please people and all of this kind of thing. And that sort of set me off down a path, which ended up with me training as a counsellor and psychotherapist, actually.
Fantastic. Wow.
So that was what I did like 20 years ago, but then didn't use it professionally other than in my work as a manager and a teacher trainer and so on. And then about 3-4 years ago, I decided that actually this was something that I wanted to do. And, if not now, then when? So I retrained as a coach, and here we are.
Beautiful. That's a beautiful marriage of a lot of different skills. And yeah, I'm sorry, I neglected to mention you are an experienced teacher trainer as well, which is a whole other level of training.
Well, it's 30 years in the business, so there's time to do a few things.
But I think that's so fantastic because if I can say us in quotes, the trainer animal, and not we're all the same exact person, but I imagine there are a lot of traits that are very similar that bring someone to this kind of profession.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah. And so may I ask then, I had two questions as you were speaking. I kind of wanted to jump right into burnout. But before we get there, maybe first you could address what are some traits you've seen repeated that come from people, particularly working as trainers?
Well, I think that people who are drawn to work with other people in this kind of way, as trainers and teachers, tend to be very giving people and empathic people. And both of those are obviously really good things. However, they can both, I think, be, a bit of a double-edged sword in that we can end up being too empathic, too giving towards other people, and not enough empathy and self-care directed towards ourselves. And, that's a very sort of short-term thing, because ultimately we can't continue like that.
Absolutely. But if I may add, I find that we don't recognize it. There are many of us who just don't realize. What has been your experience with that?
Yes, I think that's true. I mean, the other thing I would say that I often find is that people that I work with have they're very strong, and they have this idea that, it's only sort of people who are weak that burn out. But actually, it's kind of the opposite, because when you're one of those people who, is very strong, who can and does work very hard because they're passionate about what they do, you don't really notice what's happening. It's a bit like, there's a metaphor about, if you put a frog into a pan of cold water, it's the other way around. If you put a frog into a pan of hot water, it will jump out immediately. If you put it into cold water and heat it gradually, it will stay there until it's too late. I mean, not that anybody's actually doing that to frogs, I hope. But, the metaphor's clear. It builds up over time, gradually. It becomes normal for us to feel constantly stressed. And we just don't realize until we kind of hit that point where it's just too much. The body just isn't designed to put up with those kinds of chronic levels of stress.
And would you have any red flags or signs that other people may not recognize as red flags that you'd like to mention?
Yes, sure. I mean, I think there are a few actually. I'd say one thing, that is quite often the case is you have that sense of not having any spare capacity, emotionally, as much as anything. So it's like the tiniest thing that you ought to, normally just shrug off will infuriate you, So that's often a sign that, like, your bucket, if you like, is too full already. And so even just a few drops more and you're overflowing. Health-wise, if you keep getting ill, I don't mean major things, although that can certainly happen with burnout, but just, I mean, we've all been away from everybody for a year, so this probably isn't happening now. But if you're normally the kind of person that always catches every cold going, that's a sign that your immune system is suppressed, which is something which often happens as a result of stress. And so that can be an indicator, I think. Sleep problems, whether you're finding it hard to switch off at night or you're waking up, at 3, 4 a.m. with everything going around your head, that you've got too much cortisol and adrenaline going through your system, basically. And so your body cannot understand why you want to sleep when clearly your life is at threat, so it's keeping you awake. An attitude as well. I think if you start to become, more cynical and detached when you weren't like that before, that can be a sign.
Yeah, I think I've noticed sometimes with myself, if I find myself, if I'm driving and I get irritated quickly with other drivers, I go, uh-oh, because normally I don't do that too often. But if I find that creeping up, then I have to look elsewhere in my life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. So it's interesting. A burnout may not look like what I think we think. We expect it to be just total breakdown, or it may not quite look like that.
Well, I mean, eventually, if you continue, it probably will get to that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there can be lots of stages along the way. And we can go through a process of kind of coming close to the edge and then pulling ourselves back and then coming close to the edge again. You know, if every holiday you have, you feel completely exhausted and you can't switch off for like the first week, then that's a sign, I think, that you are generally doing too much.
Okay, people, do you hear that? Listen up. So true. How many of us say, oh, the first week is just coming down, and then by the second week, you're ready to finally enjoy. Yeah, interesting. So what might you suggest or offer that might help prevent this from ever becoming the case? What are some of your favorites that you've learned over?
Well, I think it's a combination for me of practical tips and looking at what's underneath, if you like. You know, so the practical tips, I think, are in many ways more obvious. You know, they're about things like getting some exercise, because exercise is really good for releasing those stress hormones, because it's like, you know, the body sort of has built them up in order to do something. And a lot of the, you know, like fight a tiger or something like that, you know, biologically. And a lot of the time we don't actually do anything with those stress hormones. So if we exercise, we can release them and stop them swilling around our body. Getting outside, and especially into nature if we can. You know, that's not just a kind of hippie thing. It has been shown that walking amongst nature definitely reduces like blood pressure more than, say, walking in an urban situation. They even think that trees give off particular pheromones, I think it is, that will actually help us to relax. So walking in a forest is particularly good.
I believe that. That's fascinating.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah. And I love the science that you're putting behind it, because it's easy to say, I could go for a walk in nature. That's nice. But if you say, I'm really doing this to release some toxic in my body, it might motivate us more.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then things like, you know, good sleep hygiene, you know, not looking at your smartphone and your emails when you're lying in bed before you try to go to sleep, meditating. You know, we know that can have a really positive impact on the brain, on the physical structure of the brain. Deep breathing, you know, there are lots of practical techniques, I think.
Right. We hear those all the time in the wellness area, and they are now becoming more and more quantified, justified, kind of hard statistics. I think that help people. But just before off the recording, we were talking a bit about some habits. I thought that was a great concept. You mentioned habits also help.
Yes. Well, habits can either help or hinder, can't they? It depends on the habit. But I think, you know, we all have this thing where we're at the beginning of the year, you know, it's New Year. We make these sort of, you know, I'm going to have all of these great new habits. And then about 2 weeks later, most of them have completely disappeared. And then we beat ourselves up about that. But actually, I think we need to recognize that this is completely natural, in that the brain resists change, because any kind of change is potentially a risk. You know, if what you're doing, you haven't died yet, then as far as, you know, your biology is concerned, that's fine. Just keep doing it, you know. So there will always be that sort of resistance to changing anything. And so rather than beating ourselves up about it, I think we have to find ways to kind of be a bit sneaky and to get around that. You know, so one, for example, is to, and it sounds obvious, but it can make a big difference, to make it really easy to make the change. So, you know, James Clear, in his book Atomic Habits, which I recommend, by the way, you look like you've read it. Yeah. So he talks about reducing friction. That's how he calls it. So, for example, if you want to go to the gym, assuming we can ever go back to the gym, make sure that your gym kit is packed and ready to go by the door. so that you don't have that opportunity to go, oh, no, I haven't got time now to get it all together.
Right.
Have things. If you want to drink more water, make sure that you have a big glass of water on your desk. Make it easy for you to make those changes and reduce the things that are stopping you from making those changes. So, if you want to eat more healthily, don't put the chocolate and biscuits somewhere that's really easy to get to.
Just don't buy it. I'm at that.
Well, or don't buy it. Yes, if you live with 2 teenagers, that's not an option. But at least it can go. Ours goes down in the cellar. So at least I have got to actually go all the way down the stairs into the cellar to get it. And just having to do that makes you stop and think rather than it being immediately to hand. And I think also not trying to do too much at once, because then we're often setting ourselves up for failure. A
lot to be said about that. Really evaluating our to-do list, the way we set up our days and our work patterns.
Yes, I mean, actually, moving on from habits, that in general, I think is really important, because people have, ridiculously unrealistic ideas of what they can actually fit into a working day. And then they're constantly, disappointed and cross with themselves for not having done it.
Absolutely. And I am the biggest victim of that. And I'm really trying to learn. But can you maybe think about some of your clients, and you don't have to speak personally about anyone, but what you've seen, especially in people who are working in training, maybe some changes they've implemented, how they did their session notes or how they booked their hour. Is there something maybe you can give us a concrete example?
So, I mean, I would say, a typical client for me actually comes to me because they are completely overloaded. So they're trying to do far too much, and equally they're not charging enough. And the two things are related. One of the taglines that I use in my business is work less, earn more, live more fully. And those things are related. And I think as educators, we're often a bit kind of awkward about money.
Yes.
We shouldn't really be expect to be paid at all. We should be doing this for love and vocation.
English, I can translate everything for anybody.
Yes, exactly. But the problem is, if you do that, you then have to work 3 times as hard in order to earn enough, for your life.
Right.
So those things are sort of very much linked together, I think. And a lot of it is about that sense of guilt about asking people for money. I often hear clients say things like, oh, I don't know if my students can afford that. To which I say, no, that's right, you don't know. Because actually, how do you know what your clients can afford or not, and how is that your business? Right. Ultimately, it's about what you think the value is of what you're providing and what will enable you to earn enough that you don't have to half kill yourself.
Right. And that is one of our goals of this podcast, is to validate the profession as a whole. I mean, we are a language training outfit, of course. We operate a little differently than a freelancer, but that said, we recognize, and the founder of our company recognized early on, she was as a trainer herself, you don't, English training might get relegated to early morning or midday. Who would send a management consultant to a company and ask them to do their business over lunch with the employees? And it's that idea that language training is a skill, a valued skill, and speaking whatever language you need at work, it's as important as new management techniques.
Absolutely. It's about communication, and how far will you get in business if you can't communicate effectively, so it's extremely important, I think. And yes, absolutely, it should be valued. And I do think actually within ESL that is a particular issue. There is still this problem of, just talking about myself, I've been in this business for 30 years. I've got a master's degree, a diploma, all of this. And I still, when I tell people what I do, quite often get people saying things like, "Oh yes, my cousin did that for a year in Thailand." I kind of think, no, it's not quite the same as your backpacking cousin. So having that sort of respect and status, if you like, and I think it's something we've got to also take for ourselves and kind of make clear,
Right, which is exactly what this initiative is here, and to and to join together rather than to look at each other competitively, but we are an industry together, and we're all working toward the same goals, and there is an abundant world. There is enough work out there for everyone there, because there's a real need. And there's a lot of myths about, the Germans, they speak English great. No, I worked there for 4 or 5 years. They don't all speak English perfectly. There is a need everywhere.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, no, I think so. And I think, there will continue to be, even with translation software and things, it's about that human connection. And you can't have that, unless you speak the language.
Right. And so, getting back to just kind of the things that can help us, trainers or anybody really, but particularly, I loved some of your points you had made. I read through your blogs. Some ideas you had, like stability zones or putting more work flow in your work life. Could you speak a little more to some of those ideas?
Sure. Yeah. So, stability zones is not a new idea. Actually, it comes from a book that was published in 1979, I think. Alvin Toffler, who wrote a book called Future Shock, and he was quite prescient, really. He did see, I think, the way that things were going and the way that life was speeding up even then.
Yes.
And absolutely has now sped up, to quite a degree. And stability zones is the idea that we consciously try to create things in our life that will help to stabilize us, if you like. So a stability zone might be a place, so it might be like your favorite seat in your garden that helps you to feel calm. But it can also be people, so those people who, when we're with them, that helps us to kind of feel grounded and safe. And indeed, the opposite as well. Are we spending too much time with people who are making us feel drained and anxious, for example? And also, it might be objects. There might be a particular, I don't know, that we light a particular candle, or so it's about finding those things that help us to feel more relaxed and grounded, those things, people and places, and then making sure that we fit those into our life. So, consciously.
That's very interesting. And it reminds me of something I heard about high performers, a little different, but high performers like Steve Jobs and his uniform. They often wear the same thing every day because it takes the thinking out of their day, which is in a sense a stability zone of just lightening the load. So he had jeans and his black top because he didn't want to spend any other time thinking of. I just think it's interesting. Fantastic.
Well, very often it is interesting. I mean, personally, I wouldn't want to wear the same thing every day because I like choosing what I wear and I get pleasure from it. But I think that, thinking about those things we do which are not in any way enhancing our life, but that we, just keep doing them. And often they're things that we just kind of don't get around to sorting. So I heard a great example actually earlier today on social media. Somebody was saying about how they hadn't got around to adjusting their heating thermostat for more than a year because it meant finding the manual. And they just hadn't found the time to do it. So every day they were manually putting on and turning off the heating. And then they worked out that this had actually used up 4 hours of their time over that year. And that gave them the motivation to actually go and do something about it. And it's a good metaphor because we do a lot of things like that, I think, where, we just can't quite be bothered to do something about it. And yet the cost is actually relatively high.
Truly. And bringing it back even to our daily work habits as trainers. I personally find sometimes that was my admin writing, we call them session notes. And you put them off, or you think, oh, I've got to get to the next client. I don't have time for that right now. But if I change that habit and make sure that I don't finish the session without that done, it saves so much time in the long run. Maybe you have other examples from other trainers of ways they've adjusted their workday to make things smoother.
Well, I think part of it is actually allowing time for that kind of thing. You know, because when we run our own business, which is essentially, you know, what we're doing, we have time that we spend in our business, i.e. training, but we also have time, we should have time that we spend on our business. And that's what often gets completely ignored. You know, so somehow the time that we have to spend writing up notes, invoicing, emailing clients, you know, all of those kinds of things is somehow supposed to magically appear on top of the time that we spend actually in our business. And I think recognizing that, no, that is actually magical thinking and it's not, you know, not going to happen, can really reduce the stress. And so you block out time to do things. I mean, you know, obviously it would be different for different people depending on what they do, you know, but for me, I now have a day a week where I don't see any clients, where I just work on my business, you know, so partly it's admin, but a lot of it is planning, you know, setting goals, reviewing what I've done, you know, those things that can help the business to grow as well, which is also important.
It's huge. And I think that you touched upon it exactly. We don't have the mindset often to see that as important and valuable. I wonder, does that go back to some of that aspect of the trainer personality, the empathetic personality who does not value themselves enough to know that things that make their life easier are valid? It's not just a nicety. I think in the beginning, I used to do that even with prepping my lessons. It felt like a luxury rather than, wait, no, this has to. and yeah, so this, what you're saying, it speaks to that. We need to adjust how we think and know that admin is as big a part of the job as the training part.
Totally, you know, because that's the underpinning. Having said that, if you can come up with systems to reduce that admin, all to the good. You know, I mean, so I have in my coaching business, I have a client management system called Dubsado, which does all of my invoicing and payment reminders and things for me. And will also send out, you know, other sort of automatic emails. So like an email asking for feedback, for example. And I absolutely love this because, you know, I used to spend so much time thinking, oh God, I haven't invoiced so-and-so, or, oh, I don't think they've paid, I better chase them, or, you know, all of this kind of thing. So to have that taken off my plate's fantastic, you know. So I do think if there are jobs that you're doing that you hate doing, somebody else can do them or an automation can do them, then absolutely, you know, do that if you can.
Yes. But I think sometimes people first need to have their eyes open to the fact that they can. Either if they can't, you know, delegate, they don't have staff, but they can find an automated system, or even Google emails can be scheduled ahead of time. You can plan your reminders all in one day and schedule them. It's technology today, the technology.
But it, you know, it's like the example about the heating thermostat. People are like, oh, that would be good, but I haven't got time to do it. But if you think about the amount of time that you're wasting, it's definitely worth the investment. And it's about focusing your energy into those areas where you can really make a difference, you know, which is going to be the training.
Right. So there's a thought for everyone listening. I challenge you today, guys, to think about what's something that's irking you, you haven't done, don't have time. If you really think about it, if you take the time, maybe this week or even this weekend, it could relieve a lot of stress in the long run.
Yeah.
It's a great one. Thank you, Rachel. I love that. I also wanted to touch a little more on just this people-pleasing aspect, you know, the industry, a lot of us are like that. And what have you observed? What have you helped people with in regard to that?
I think it's a big one. And when we were talking about burnout, I said there's like the practical stuff and then there's the underlying stuff. And the people pleasing is very often the underlying stuff, I think, by which I mean that it's about the messages that we were brought up with and what we saw, as children. So when we're very little, everything that our parents or caregivers do and say, we take completely as gospel, because why wouldn't we? We don't have any other perspective and we're completely dependent on these people. And so our brain kind of gets formed into particular patterns. So for me, to give an example, my mother is one of these kinds of people who is always doing something. She doesn't even like coming around to my house because then she has to just sit. She prefers me to come around to hers because then she can get on with stuff while we talk. So I really picked up from that this idea that I ought to be busy and doing something all of the time. And it's a very strong kind of bit of programming, if you like, in my brain. And so once you're aware of that, and that actually not everybody behaves that way, because of course you think everyone's like that, then you can start to question it. And then you can start to decide, you can choose differently. You can think, okay, I can feel that I have this urge that I ought to be busy and doing something now. However, with the more logical part of my brain, not the automatic program part, I know that I need to rest. So I am going to, put my feet up and read this book.
Huge. I love this simple idea of question. Question it. Is this a program or is this really what you want to be doing?
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, there's a really good book, another book I recommend. I don't know if you've read it, called The Chimp Paradox.
No, I don't know that.
So no, it's a great book. So it's by a guy called Steve Peters, and he talks about, it's about the brain a lot, and he talks about how it's called the Chimp Paradox because we have this part of our brain that he calls the chimp, which is basically the amygdala, which is the sort of fight, flight, freeze part of the brain, very primitive part of the brain, right in the middle. And the chimp is sort of what reacts if, we're about to step under a bus and we step back. It's that kind of really automatic part. And obviously we need that when we're under threat. But what we don't need is for that to be running our life, because it's like we're being managed by a really reactive, fearful toddler, basically. So another part of our brain is the human, which is kind of like the real us, if you like, more evolved. And then the third part is what he calls the computer. And what he says is that either the chimp or the human can program the computer. And so set up like these automatic ways of behaving. And a lot of what we were brought up with is kind of chimp programming, because it's when we're very little that we've put these programs into place.
Right.
And so we can reprogram those things and create new neural pathways. It takes time, but we can get the human to reprogram that computer.
Which is such a relief, isn't it?
Yes, exactly.
There's hope for us, guys. There's hope.
Yeah.
Bad habits, any things we think that's just the way I am, I'll think twice.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, because it's, of course we have genetic tendencies, but a lot of the way that we think we are is programming, and it absolutely can be reprogrammed.
Yeah, this is fantastic to know. And I like the analogy. Someone says, like, who's driving the bus?
Yes.
Them driving the bus, or are you letting the 2-year-old or whatever?
Well, no, exactly. You do not want your chimp driving the bus.
No. And so there are a lot of things we can change. Fantastic. So mindset and habits are a big part of it. Gives us a lot of power. I love the feeling of we do have the power. And sometimes as freelancers, trainers may feel I'm at the mercy of the industry or the employees, the work that comes, but there are a lot of things we can steal.
I think so. And I think this is actually going back to, the people pleasing. I think this is the other reason that often clients find themselves doing this is because they are frightened. Oh, if I don't bend over backwards, I won't get more work. If I don't sort of, fear really that there might not be more work or that they might be rejected. Now, of course, there could be some truth in this because, sometimes companies and employers can be somewhat unreasonable. However, generally speaking, that is just fear. I spoke to somebody earlier this week who was thinking of leaving a writing project. This was an ELT writer, had been treated appallingly, I have to say, over a long period of time, had got to the point of, I can't do this anymore and I don't care if they even don't pay me, and was, thinking of just making up an excuse to stop the project. And then in fact, the conversation we had, they decided no, they weren't going to make an excuse, but they were just going to leave because there was no point doing anything else. They then decided, actually, no, I am going to say something. I think through having explored the alternative, if you like. Right. So they were very sort of, just pleasant but assertive about it. And the company got back immediately like, oh, yes, that sounds very reasonable. And, we'll be paying you more. And, they got everything they wanted, basically. So sometimes that fear actually is in our head.
Right. And people are not aware. The people we work with sometimes, the business partners, they may be just in their own world and they're completely not aware of what's going on for you. So
well, it's really easy, I think, for all of us to make up stories about what the other person is thinking and what's happening. And sometimes it's just totally wrong.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. So, my goodness, this has been so great. There's so many, I think we could probably talk for a long time. But I'm aware of your time and our trainers' times. But is there something you want to share that you would like people to know that you just feel that they don't and they haven't gotten and they keep coming to you for?
No pressure there. I think the key thing actually that a lot of my work comes back to is that saying, don't believe everything you think. Because we tend to assume that our brain is, what we should trust, if you like. We're intelligent people and we can think these things through and that will always be the best solution. But actually, as we've seen, that when we were talking about the chimp and the human, there are parts of our brain that really we should not be trusting at all. There are parts of our brain that are trying to sabotage us, hold us back, through fear mainly and kind of wanting to protect us. But that is not necessarily the best advice, if you like. So it's about not just reacting to that first kind of fearful impression, but actually taking time to question it, as you say, to also become more aware of what we're feeling, because often our emotions are actually a much truer source of information than what we're thinking. Because we can find our brain going, oh, yes, you should definitely take this opportunity. It's a really good opportunity for us. But if we go a bit deeper, we can feel ourselves going, oh, my God, no, over my dead body, because we know that it's actually going to be a really unpleasant experience for us, So, yeah, that would be my thing, to recognize that, your thoughts are not necessarily always right, and sometimes need questioning.
Right. And what you just said, I think is really worth exploring just a bit. Because often we want to take work because we need the work, but you have that gut instinct that's telling you this is going to be a nightmare. But to give yourself permission to really explore before you pull the trigger and say yes.
Absolutely. And I would say, if you are getting that gut feeling, this is going to be a nightmare, believe it. simply is, and trust yourself that there is other work out there and that you can find it.
Yeah, there's enough to go around.
Yeah,
to go around for everyone. I believe that. And before I let you go, Rachel, I'd love just to address, because we are in this particularly unique time of this pandemic, isolation. Do you have any thoughts about the isolation we may feel as freelancers, and now we don't even see our colleagues?
Yes, I think this has been a really hard time for a lot of people. I work from home anyway, but I live with my family, so I don't have that kind of isolation. And I think, this has been particularly tough for people who are much more extrovert than I am. And people who live alone. And I think if it's a combination of those two things, if you need to be with other people to get that energy, and you live alone, I think this has been hugely tough. So I think maybe the first thing to say is, recognizing that this is not like a weakness or that there's something wrong with you, or if you found this really difficult, because you haven't been getting what you need, which is that contact with people. I think it's important, just on a practical level, I think it is important that we keep up a proper routine, that we consciously try to look after ourselves. It's a bit like being an athlete, I think. If you were going to run a marathon, you would make sure that you ate properly, that you slept properly, that you exercised. And this has been a marathon.
Yeah.
So I think we need to take that same kind of attitude, if you like, of, consciously really looking after ourselves, and, making sure that we do get as much connection with other people as we can, even if it's limited, we have to, do what we can to keep that, whether it's Zoom calls or, if we can meet up distanced with one other person, or, rules vary in different countries.
Right. And I think we've seen that Zoom, we can talk about the Zoom fatigue and all that, but I do find that my lessons, I feel a connection with my learner. I feel the exchange and the heart and the caring and the laughter. There are times that, having sessions just brightens my day completely, and it's all over Zoom. But
yes, I don't think it's a question of there not being a connection. I mean, I do all of my coaching pretty much over Zoom, and I think actually it can be very intimate, because you're really quite close to the person.
Right.
However, in a way, I think that's where the fatigue comes from, because you are really focused on that person, probably more so than you would be if you were sitting in the same room with them.
And that may be one thing worth mentioning, is that you may feel tired after your session on Zoom. And if you have the luxury of scheduling a little buffer time between, maybe 15 minutes, acknowledge, give yourself that break.
I agree. Totally. I that is something I always do, actually. I always have like a buffer, because I do need to just go out and, stand in the garden or make a cup of tea, or,
and
just do something like that.
It's for that. And it's sometimes I used to have that guilt feeling like, oh, well, I've got this buffer between classes and I should be doing my notes and I should be doing the this or the that for work as well. But actually, I need to decompress from giving that standing on the balcony or the garden is what we need to do. So give yourself permission.
Yeah. Well, and also if you feel guilty about it, flip it around. It's much better for the next client if you're, properly present and not still half in the previous session.
Right. Right. Presence. Oh, Rachel, I feel like we could probably speak for days. This is so.
I probably could. I love talking about this kind of stuff.
Yeah, same here. But I'm aware of your time, and I hope that this. I know this brought some new insights to a lot of people, and I hope that they get some benefit from maybe some new food for thought and ways to preserve their energy.
That's so important. So thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, thank you for coming. Now, how can people get a hold of you? Yes.
So, I mean, I think what I would suggest in the first place is if anybody's on Facebook, come and join my free Facebook group, because, that's called Lightbulb Moments. Lightbulb Moments, helping ELT professionals manage stress and gain balance is the full name. So it's kind of, what it says it is. So come and join that, because I do regular lives. We have guest experts. We have a book group. So there's lots of things you can get involved with there. If you're not on Facebook, you can find me on other social media under Life Resourceful, which is the name of my company.
Life Resourceful.
Or, my website is the other place of contact, and that's life-resourceful.com.
Excellent. And we'll be sure to put that in our episode description. That's fantastic. So, Rachael, you do speaking in events. Are there any upcoming events already planned out for the summer or after May, June that are on your calendar?
So yes, I do quite a lot of speaking around these kinds of topics, and those things related to teaching as well. So I am going to be doing a talk for the NeuroHeart conference in May.
Oh, fantastic!
About growth mindset in the classroom.
Excellent. So if you don't know, NeuroHeart conference was the association started by Rachel Paling.
That's right.
Which is something we at Business Class are quite big fans of. We have a couple of neurolanguage coaches, myself included. So we're fans. Fantastic. Okay. Well, Rachael, thank you so much for joining us. We hope to maybe get you again someday if you'd be willing.
Yes, that would be great.
Great. Okay, so best of luck.
Really nice to talk to you.
You too. Thanks for joining us in the Business Class ESL Breakroom, the podcast designed to bring business English trainers useful ideas, inspiration, and conversation that motivates. Follow us on Instagram at business_class_language and subscribe to the ESL Breakroom playlist on Spotify, Deezer, or Apple Music for new episodes. See you next time.